I'm Robin Bennett. I'm one of the co-founders of the Dog Gurus, and Susan Briggs is the other co-founder. And the Dog Gurus helps pet care businesses launch, grow, and profit. So we help brand new businesses start up. We help businesses that are already existing to grow, and then ultimately help you to make your business more valuable if you want to expand or sell or franchise or whatever you want to do with your business. So that's what we do. We do that two ways. We have business consulting programs that we offer, both online and some private personal coaching as well through a program called Profit Network. And then we also have staff training programs because we know that teaching your staff the right things to do is critical to your success. So we also have some staff training programs as well. So check those out at our website, which is thedoggurus.com. And we will kick it off by saying that we're going to talk, like I said, about the best layout for your facility. If you guys who are tuning in, if you want to let us know, are you opening up? Are you looking to expand? Are you looking to remodel, add a second facility? What types of facility layout questions do you have? I guess that would help us to direct our conversation. But we're going to start out, I think, Susan, if you want to start out a little bit with revenue per square foot, because I know we
Yeah,
talk about that.
I'm big on key performance indicators or KPIs. And I think one that our industry on the service side doesn't really focus on is the revenue per square foot. And as the cost of being in a physical space continues to go up, I think it's one that we may need to start focusing on so that you can decide, are you efficiently using the square footage you have to generate the most revenue and, even more importantly, profit? So revenue per square foot would be basically taking your physical footprint of how many square feet are you paying for either in a lease or building and divide that into your total revenue. And I don't know that this is something I would track every month, but probably every quarter. And it would definitely be something that I would be focused on as far as thinking about how I'm using my square footage and which services are taking up the most square footage and are they the most profitable services. So you could even look at this on a per service basis as far as square footage that's allocated to different services. But I think it's something that we haven't focused on. Robin and I, we talked about some in COVID and post-COVID coming out of it, how we're using your square footage. But sometimes I think it's good as a business owner to step back and ask yourself, if you were to redesign your building from scratch, would you do it the same way? Why or why not?
So I think everybody always says, like, you get even I was in 3 different locations in my facility. And the first one, I was like, this is perfect. Like, I love this place because I had a shell. And Mikey just said he's going to have to relocate his own the business for 6 months and thought he'd get some build out ideas. Someone else said they have a shell space to renovate. Megan said that we're looking to open next summer. We have a shell space to renovate. Cindy said she's looking to open a new facility. Shannon said remodeling a warehouse, 2-story boarding in a basement area, and daycare on main floor. So a lot of ideas happen when you have that like space and you're thinking, I can do anything I want with this. And that's how my first facility was, very small. And I had it mainly as a training facility, but I designed it and I thought it was perfect. And then I ended up adding daycare and I still thought it was perfect for a year. And then I was like, if I did this again, and I think no matter how beautiful your space ends up being, you'll, after a couple of years, maybe even not that much time, you're going to start going, I wish I'd have done this, or I wish I'd have done that. I will say that one of the best ideas you can do right now while you're in the kind of design stage or brainstorming stage of all the stuff you want is to go visit other facilities and let them know who you are. I wouldn't necessarily go to your competitors directly in your area. That they probably won't like that very much, to be honest, unless you're friends with them already. But go to some place that is outside your area. If you take a vacation somewhere, then find out if there's daycares near that location or boarding facilities near that location who might be willing to give you a little tour. I would be upfront with them that you're going to be in the business. Or if you're in Facebook groups with other daycare operators or owners, then ask them, hey, is anybody open to me coming and taking a tour? If you go to a conference, see if there's locations. Because what you'll find is there's so many different ways you can design your building, and you'll get ideas from others that maybe you hadn't even thought of. And ask that same question to all of those people. If you had to do it again, what would you do differently? So I think that's one of the biggest things to look at. I think going back to what Susan was talking about a minute ago, the revenue per square foot, generally speaking, in this industry, boarding, if you look at boarding, training, grooming, and there was another one,
Daycare.
daycare, boarding, daycare, training, and grooming. Let's just say those four services in a brick and mortar store. Generally speaking, boarding is going to be one of the most profitable ones, which is why people tend to build big, huge boarding enclosure, a lot of boarding enclosures if they have a large facility. And so they'll dedicate a really large portion of their building to the lodging. But you do have to consider how full the lodging is going to be. So most of the time, and the lodging tends to be full the most during the holidays. So peak season, generally speaking, Thanksgiving through Christmas, that time frame with a little bit of a lull in between. And then summer is hit or miss. Summer over the weekends is typically really full, not necessarily every week, every day of the summer, but summer tends to be a busier season in general in the pet industry. But the rest of the year, you can have a lot of big swings as to how full your boarding is. So we would really recommend looking at options with your boarding that you can use those lodging enclosures for other things. That's why we're big proponents of enrichment daycare, which can use lodging enclosures for nap time or for puzzle toys or that kind of thing. But you might really want to think about maybe when it's not peak season, there's a way to move those lodging enclosures so that you free up space to do something else. Maybe you're going to do training, or maybe you're going to do more daycare or enrichment or whatever. But flexibility, I think, in any kind of design is really critical because you might be able to use the space for other options.
Yeah, and for existing businesses, I would pull out those peak periods and then calculate what your boarding occupancy is. Because I tend to agree that midweek and off-peak season boarding enclosures take up a lot of square footage and are likely not bringing in revenue. So, like Robin said, how can you bring that in? And I think if because occupancy, including the peak season, looks good 60-70%, maybe that's great, but what is it when it's not peak? And I think that would give you some clues just to maybe some possibility for reuse or reallocation. We've had some people that have done that, some members, and ended up changing their allocation of lodging space. One thing I did in my business is we had a room that we did like small dog daycare in, we did evaluations in, that wasn't a very big room. And for the holidays, we would put crates in there. And we were very selective about the dogs that we put in those crates. Most of them went to our daycare during the day. They were used to being in crates. Pet parents knew they were going to be lodging in a crate. But really, that was usually only one night of the peak season. Even Thanksgiving and Christmas, there's usually only 1 or 2 nights that you're 100% full. And so there's some other ways that you can increase your occupancy for the holidays. I like the Mason pull-out enclosures. That would be another way without having to have them 100% dedicated to lodging.
I'm seeing if I can find those Mason closures real quick,
Okay.
and I'll put a link in there.
So the more flexibility you can build in, I think the happier you will be. And
I put a link to Mason Kennels. I didn't have and actually I guess it's Midmark now, but although that website still works. But if you search in there, they do have a newer, it's probably a year or two old now, but they have lodging enclosures that actually fold up against the wall and then you can pull them out. I wouldn't necessarily use them in a room where there's dogs playing, but they're a good option to use like for lodging in the evening. And then during the day, you can move the enclosure so that you have freed that room up for daycare. The other thing I would be looking at is whether or not you can reconfigure things. Sometimes, right now, with inflation as high as it is, with staffing being a lot different than it was pre-COVID, particularly just finding the right team members and then also being able to pay them. We're seeing a lot of facilities that are raising their entry level pay from where it used to be. And that's going in line with kind of the market in a lot of states are going to a minimum wage of $15 starting pay. So we're seeing in costs go up in terms of your staff. What that means though is your staff has to be as efficient as possible. So really looking at, are there things you can do in your facility that might be redesigned? They might just be reorganizing the workflow in general. And one of the things that I worked with another facility on was they had daycare dogs that did boarding, but they also boarded dogs that didn't go to daycare. So they took any dogs in for lodging overnight, but they also did daycare. Where, as opposed to, what I mean by that is some daycare boarding facilities only board dogs that come to daycare. This particular facility took both. If your dog wasn't good in daycare, you could still lodge, but they had a big issue with trying to make sure that the dogs going to daycare got into the daycare without having to walk like huge distances. And so we worked together to reconfine. They didn't redesign anything. They basically just reallocated which lodging enclosures were going to be daycare closures, and those were going to be the ones closest to the daycare, which they never thought about before because it didn't really matter before. But then as they got bigger, it started to make, time wise, it started to be a huge time suck to take a dog that takes a minute to get to daycare. We'll add that up 50 times. You start to really reduce your labor, how effective your labor force is. So we reworked their workflow basically to say, okay, these enclosures that are right next to the daycare space, those are going to be your daycare dogs. And all of these over here are going to be your lodging dogs. So looking at where the dogs have to go, that might come into play with how often you have to take the dogs outside if they're not going to daycare or they're not going into an outdoor area. But just workflow efficiencies like that. And I'll tell you, the best people to ask about being more efficient generally are your staff. Because honestly, your staff are probably, if you're not working effectively, if the staff's not working effectively, they probably know it. They're probably sitting around in the lunchroom going, it's so dumb that we do this and this. Would it be much better if we did it this way? So ask them if they see efficiencies that might involve just how you're setting up things, or it might involve moving enclosures from one location to the other. And there might be a cost involved with that, but it could still be a benefit if over time it saves your staff time.
Absolutely. We got a 20,000 square foot building. You could get a lot of steps in during the day. And so don't underestimate what that costs.
So PJ said, we're mostly outside in Central Florida, nice pole barn for small classes, small training building, and can move classes to our living room in bad weather for real life practice. That's awesome. Former sod farm with great grass level. That's a great location. Yeah. And that's another thing is somebody was on, I don't remember if it was on a Facebook group or where I saw this, but looking at adding training classes, but they were mostly outside. The space they had available was mostly outside, and they had bad winters. So she was asking for suggestions about what to do for that. And I would really look at those of you that are in climates that it's nice year round. That's great because you essentially have a larger footprint that you can use for all of your activities. But if you're in an area where it's either really hot, like Arizona, you really aren't going to be outside with the dogs in the day, really, even in the morning in Arizona, because it's so hot right now. Or like where it's a really bad winter, where in the winter, maybe you're not going to be outside with the dogs. What are options that you can use? I will say that you can get really creative in using space for things like enrichment and private lessons for training. Especially, I've trained in all kinds of little tiny areas when I'm doing one-on-one training. I've trained in the lobby before, which is actually a really good place to train. Maybe not so much with a newer dog when it's really busy, but during the day where there's not a lot of activity going on, the lobby is a great place to do training. We used to use a small room like what you were talking about, Susan, where we did evaluations a lot, but I also did training in there with private lessons. And then I've done training even if there's a bank of enclosures that's not really heavily being used, and so there's no dogs back there, then that aisleway in between the enclosures I would use. I wouldn't necessarily do that if there were dogs being boarded, but when the occupancy isn't as high, I would use that. And the same thing with enrichment. If you're doing individual enrichment activities, you can get really creative on how to use the space that you already have without even having to redesign things. So really looking at what space you use. And I think the other space, what I consider a space suck, is storage. So really looking at what you're storing in your storage rooms, whether obviously if it's stuff that you need, but I would really question how much do you use that's in that storage unit? Because for me, my storage unit over time always just became just a place that all kinds of crap ended up. And once a year, we would try to go through it all to decide, are we ever going to use this again? And if so, is this the best place to store it? We started storing a lot of our stuff on hanging on walls, not necessarily in that storage room, but then that freed up the storage room for other things. So you could actually get some space back there as well.
I think that's a great point because what I found is you can expand into whatever space you have, and then you may not be efficient. So, like labeling the shelves of what you need to store and thinking about how many you keep on stock, go into that just in time ordering. And I love the other thing that you said was how can you use the vertical wall space to be more efficient for that? Because storage and office space are not revenue producing. I do believe that there needs to be some office space. I believe that staff needs somewhere where they can go, relax, take a break, have lunch. But is there ways to use that space for more than one purpose?
Yeah. And then really scheduling the space as well. Obviously, if you have daycare and lodging, those usually have set hours and where you're going to close. But I will say that the way that when I was doing training in daycare, I didn't do lodging, so that it wasn't as much big of an issue. But I did end up training in a place that does lodging, so I guess it does come into play. But we had set hours, and my staff knew the training was going to start at 7 and daycare ended at 6, which means the place needed to be completely clean, completely ready to go. The trainers usually were showing up at 6:30 so that they could set up their training class, which meant the floors had to be done by then. And that took a while to work that out because let's be honest, sometimes it just didn't always happen. But I really worked with my staff to say, look, you have to get done with your work and the place has to be clean. And if there's dogs that haven't been picked up, you need to bring them up and put them in enclosures because they can't be out while the trainer's there setting up, and really making sure that space was being effective. Because what the daycare staff wanted to do initially was tell me to start training later. And I
Mhm.
wasn't willing to do that. I was like, no, training needs, because we had two classes a night. So one class at 7, one class at 8. And I didn't want to push that time back. So sometimes it's really looking at, and I'm telling you, you can get it done. And then we ended our 7 o'clock class ended at 7:45, and the next class started at 8. And we managed to do that. But really keeping that schedule to understand so that the team knows these are the expectations so that you can get things cleaned up and set up for the next activity. That again is stuff that's going to generate revenue, because I don't really want to have the building sitting doing nothing for a couple of hours if I can actually generate revenue by offering a training class during that time frame. So really looking at all of your space from that standpoint of what else can we do there, and is it being even your lodge, even your grooming room. Most of the time you're not going to need that, but if your groomers aren't in there, that's another location where you could do some training. We actually had a grooming location in the third place where I was doing training, and we used it for puppy classes in the evening for socialization. So we actually, and the groomers obviously weren't there by then. So we offered some classes where we would expose a puppy to the hair dryers and the bathtub, and we would get them in there and turn the water on. We wouldn't give them a bath, but we'd get them used to going up the stairs in the bath. So we actually ended up creating like a grooming program. It was part of our socialization program, but it included that grooming room so we could generate revenue that way, which maybe even your groomers want to do if they like working with dogs.
Absolutely.
But there's just a lot of opportunity that when you look around your facility and you're like, what space is not actually generating revenue? What can you do to cause it to generate revenue? And that's really what you want to look at holistically for how you can make your business more profitable.
Yeah. And I still like retail in your lobby, and it doesn't have to take up a lot of space. So figuring out efficient ways to use walls and movable racks and stuff for retail will help because it's good to have. We had a large lobby, and I actually had a banker tell me my lobby was too big. However, we had a lot of dogs pass through there for daycare. We would take dogs for lodging that weren't in daycare. And so I liked having enough space to spread people out during busy times. However, we also had a lot of retail. And so we also had like retail racks that could help divide things up. So even though I had a lot of space allocated to my lobby reception area, I did find a way to make more revenue from that.
Yeah, and if you're going to have retail in your facility, then really working with your team to make sure they know what's there and when they should recommend it for somebody. Because if it's just sitting there, people won't necessarily buy it. It's not the whole just have it there and they'll naturally buy it. There are some things, if you have the impulse buy stuff at the cash register, they might purchase. But if they have to go and see how something works, or it's a toy or something and they don't never seen it before, they may not take the time while they're picking up their dog to go look at that. So you have to have some kind of strategy. And if you're currently selling retail, I would assess like how well is stuff turning over, because if it's sitting there on the shelves for months and months, that's inventory. That's money you've tied up in inventory. That is not the goal. You want it to rotate. So really looking at, I would recommend for most daycare lodging facilities, you're putting stuff in there that is something the owner has to buy frequently, like food or treats that they might buy on a recurring basis. If it's stuff that they are going to buy once and then probably not need again, I wouldn't have as many of those. And I would do those more on like specialty products that are you buy a limited amount and you promote it as these are the only ones we have when they're gone, so that encouraging the people to buy quickly. Things for holidays, I think, are really good. But again, your staff has to make sure that your clients know you have this special thing at the holiday and why they might want to buy this thing for a stocking stuffer or some thing to use in a picture for the holidays or whatever it is. And then the other thing I like is anything that you can are using in your program. So anything that clients see you using with their dogs in your training classes, in your grooming, in your lodging enclosures and daycare. So if you're using puzzle toys, or when I had my training program, we used clickers and we used treats and we used harnesses. So I sold all of those things because invariably people would want whatever it was that I had or whatever it was we were using. Same thing if you're using climbs, I would sell those. So making those available. And you can find some dealers where like Blue Nine Pet Products will actually let you be a dealer and drop ship climbs to your clients. So you don't even have to have the inventory on hand if you don't have enough space for that kind of thing. But really making sure that your inventory is selling and you're not just tying up thousands of dollars for stuff to sit on the shelf. If you have a lot of stuff sitting on your shelf right now, I would probably just start
I'd
finding
have a
unique ways.
sidewalk sale, a fall sidewalk sale.
Exactly. Or flash sale. We just had a flash sale ourselves because I was cleaning out our storage unit and as all storage units do, we had a bunch of stuff in there from various trade shows, and normally we would clean that out on a routine basis every time we do a trade show. Well, due to COVID, we didn't have trade shows for 2 years. So somehow like everything in there somehow ballooned into this ridiculous mess of things. So anyway, in the process of cleaning out that storage unit, I actually found some old USBs. So we actually did a flash sale to sell those. So they work. Flash sales work.
They do.
And that way, hopefully, at least you get your revenue back from whatever you spent to bring that stuff into your facility, but it's no longer tied up in your money is no longer tied up in inventory and you can try something new. All right. Who has questions on anything that they're wondering about in terms of using their facility or building their facility? I think other things to consider is it for as much as we talk about the storage, you do want to have a safe place to keep cleaning supplies. And I would include not just your cleaning supplies, but anything that obviously you don't want the dogs to get into. I would look at the how you're moving dogs from one location to the other, kind of what we talked about before, but also how big does that area need to be? I've seen facilities where they have, okay, I'll tell you the mistake I've seen. The very first facility I had, which again, I started as a training facility, so I didn't design it for daycare. Then when I added daycare, I had just one room, which was great because I didn't really need any aisleways or anything. But as that place got bigger, I started dividing the group into two. And then it was really hard because I basically had one door from the lobby into the playroom and no real way to figure out how do I get them to the right room
Yeah.
because I had no aisleway. And I ended up moving into another location and I solved that problem by creating an aisleway. But how big does that aisleway have to be? You want to have some way that you can get dogs. If you have three different groups, three different sizes and play styles and all that, how are you moving dogs from one group to the other, and how are you pulling a dog out without having to walk through the other two groups? And those are things a lot of times that when you're first designing a facility you don't think about at all, because you're just assuming like it's a big old space and we get out over here. And then as you start to maybe add more play areas, there has to be a way to safely move the dogs from one play area without having to walk them through all the other play areas. So I think that's another one to consider. But I also don't think that has to be a huge space. I mean, I've seen daycares where that space is like 5 to 10 feet. And that's literally 5 to 10 feet of an aisle that all your staff is doing is walking up and down it. And that might not be the best use of space either. So it doesn't necessarily have to be huge. So you want to look at that as well. And then sizes of enclosures, I think, is the other thing. I will say we are seeing more. I think this is true, Susan. I guess I'll ask you too, but I feel like we're seeing more larger suites
Yeah.
than we used to. I tend to recommend having a couple of different options of sizes, partly because you are going to have big dogs and small dogs, unless you're going to cater yourself to just one size, which we have seen that. We've seen daycares that are, or lodging enclosures that cater to a specific size, especially small dogs. Like in New York City, you might have a facility that caters really to smaller dogs, which is totally fine. Then you can put more small enclosures in the same space as you could put one really large enclosure. So that's a good way to use space. But I am finding that there's a lot of people, even with small dogs, that'll pay for a really large luxury. So
And
with
I
the larger suites, you might charge more for those because they're not necessarily because of the size, but more of the care that their dogs are getting is how we would normally phrase that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think 4x6 is the common size, which is great. I tend to like square, so 6x6 just seems bigger than 4x6. It's that closet. 8x8 is big. It's important in lodging that the dogs have enough space to relax and get comfortable. And you also have some people that want to have family dogs share. And I think you have to set those capacities as far as size of dogs that you let share at a certain size. But I wouldn't go too small, especially if you are going to do big dogs.
And they do have, and I think this is Mason as well, that has the double decker
Yeah,
enclosures where, and we saw this in LA Dog Works has this, where they have enclosures on the bottom, uh, and they're large enclosures. I think they were 4x6. They might have been 4x4, but there's a bank of enclosures, pretty large enclosures, and then another bank on top of them with stairs at the end. So you go up the stairs to get to that double decker, and there's a whole platform where you can walk across that upper area basically. So they get twice as much enclosures in a single square foot area because
right.
they got room to go up and they didn't have room to go out. So that's another way of looking at, and there's pros and cons to that too, but they've been doing that for years and it's working for them. But that's another way of increasing your capacity without necessarily using square foot on the ground because you're
Yeah.
going up.
Yeah, if you have the height in your building, I think it's great. And then that second tier is probably used mostly in peak periods that when it's not as busy, you're just doing the lower tier. Because I have talked to staff that going up and down stairs a lot with dogs isn't the best part of their day.
Yeah, especially with the bigger dogs that are likely to pull. And
Yeah.
then PJ said thoughts on help answering phones if you're a one person operation.
I think there's a couple of things you can do. You can look at phone answering services. It depends on how important it is for people to get a live person when they call. And if that's very important to you and your brand, then you might consider a phone answering service that can take messages when you're not available. Or you have a really good phone system that can route calls and let them know that you're out with the dogs, but a time when you will get back to them with how many hours. And then I would schedule time for yourself throughout the day where I need to stop, go check messages, and return phone calls.
Yeah, I think that's the critical piece is the what I did initially. and then I stopped because I realized it wasn't working, is I would just be like, oh, the end of the day, I'll call everyone back. Then I was so tired. This was when I was working by myself. I was so tired by the end of the day. I didn't want to call back people back. And then so then it would usually be the next day. And then the next day would kick off with just crazy busy because I was letting dogs in. And then next thing I knew, it had been 2 days. I haven't returned a call. So I did start saying I'm going to return calls when at nap time. And so when I would crate all the dogs, I had a 2 hour period where all the dogs were crated, and that was usually when I ate lunch as well. But that's when I started saying, I'm just going to call people now because, and I might have to leave a message for them, but that's fine. At least I was getting back with them. Another option is making sure that they have a way to give you whatever information they need help with. I like the phone answering services because you can set them up to where even if it's just you checking, even if it's just one person who's going to be answering the phones and checking the phones, you can still get them to say, press one if you're a brand new client, you want to learn about our services, press two if you have a dog with us and have questions, and press three might be for billing or whatever. Maybe you only have two. But then you at least know what the urgency is as well. Because if they have a dog with you, there might be that would be a client I would probably want to call right away. Not that I don't want to not call the brand new client either, but those calls are going to probably be longer calls if it's a brand new client. So just in terms of knowing the use of my time, if I'm making returning phone calls, how to do that. And then obviously the other option is to hire someone to do some of those calls for you as well, ultimately. And that could be a virtual person too. So
So should we share our friends at TWC if people are looking for help with design and
I'm going to go grab their website.
yeah, so we do work with the folks at TWC that do a lot of pet facility, pet services, as well as veterinarians, design and construction. They're a resource that you can work with. They've got a lot of experience in the pet space, so they can help you on some of these things. In fact, earlier this week, Charlotte and I were on with a lot of their architects and designers, and their whole team got on because they wanted to learn more and make sure they were up to date with the latest things that were going on in pet care services. They definitely stay educated on our industry.
And they actually will work with you on preliminary planning, estimating cost, doing some design and architecture drawings. And then if you don't necessarily have to use them, although obviously they would like you to, but they'll do a lot of the work with you ahead of time. I think you're going to be super happy and would want to work with them, but they also are not going to force you to work with them either. So I like that about them too, is they'll help answer questions. They're very much aligned with the dog gurus in the sense that they want to make sure that their clients are properly educated and they're not just doing things for the sake of doing stuff, which also means it's a conversation. So you might say, hey, let's do this. And they might tell you, in the pet industry, we need to take in the divine this and this. That might change what you're thinking, because there are some really specific issues that stem from just the fact that there's dogs and animals in your facility that they're experienced with. So Ray Ann said, how would I successfully open another location for daycare only? I'm out of room for daycare dogs.
I think I know how you're going to answer that one. But
But
it's a great question, Rayanne, because we want to hear Robin's answer.
so I would first ask, do you want to open another facility? If your ultimate goal is to just take in as many dogs as possible and serve as many dogs as possible, then a second location might be a good idea. If your goal is really to make more revenue, then I would be saying if you have when you have a wait list and you're out of room is the best place to raise your rates and make sure you're as profitable as possible, especially now with inflation going up. I would really, that would be my first option, would be to say, do I really want to open a second location right now? Or do I just really want to maximize the dogs that are coming, get the best dogs possible? Because I would be looking at, for that situation, I'd be looking at increasing your rates and possibly adding a membership that may or may not be, might be just everybody has to be a member in order to come here, because that's going to reduce the number of dogs that you are going to probably take in. So you may be able to manage that wait list by just raising prices. But if you're going to open another daycare, and we have had facilities that have done this where they have one location that is lodging and daycare and another location that's like Urban Pooch, another location is just training. I've worked with another facility where their second location was just daycare, kind of like what you're talking about. The thing that you have to remember when you open the second location is you have to have really strong systems in place at your current location. And that has to be replicable. What's that word? I don't even know. Replicatable. It has to be able to be duplicated. That's what I'm trying to say. And it has to be able to be duplicated pretty easily, which means you have to have all the processes in place, ideally written down. And that includes everything from how you bring in staff, how you train the staff, how you get staff on board. You have to have management procedures in place because there's going to need to be someone there that's managing that when you're not there. And maybe you have a general manager, or maybe you end up with two like supervisors at each location, whichever way that would work out best. And that kind of will be dependent on how far away from your current location that second location is. And then you also have to be able to understand the marketing is going to be needed to be doubled so that you can market to that other location. So there's just a lot. It's not always as easy as just saying, oh, I'll just do the same thing over there. It is, but all of that same thing you're going to do needs to be documented and easy to replicate so that you can actually not be killing yourself while you're trying to open that new location. What most people find is that the second location adds a lot more work than they were expecting. So that's the only thing I guess I would caution you about. So Rand said more revenue. Yes, I don't want another location, but I'm booked 3 weeks out at a time. See, that again, that either you are okay just telling people, look, we are so full that I can maybe get you in, but you really have, that's where I would be looking at a membership to tell people, look, we are so busy that this is a members only situation. Like you have to be a member, which means now you charge a certain amount for them to just be a member, to basically have access to your services. So they're paying that. So that's additional revenue right there. But now you're catering just to this very select group of members that you have. And then you can tell people, look, we don't have any openings in our membership until somebody leaves. It becomes a very unique club, and you may be raising your rates at the same time. So that's really what I would look at.
And I would definitely be charging them for their reservation spots, whether they show up or not, when you're limited and turning away revenue. So I think there's some things you can do in your policies and restructuring your services, like Robin said, that will get you more revenue without having to go through the expense and hassle of having a second location you don't really want. It's a good problem to have. Congratulations.
Yeah, it's really a good problem to have. And then the other option is, so Ran, are you doing other services, or it sounds like you're doing other services than just daycare at your first location? I'll just give her a second because the other option I was going to say is you may want to look at, can you free up space in your current place to open up more daycare? If you're making enough year round, if you're making enough in daycare that maybe you don't need 5 of those lodging enclosures, then maybe get rid of those 5 lodging enclosures, maybe get rid of 5 lodging enclosures. We saw a lot of people do that during COVID. They actually pulled out some of their lodging and put in other services. So that's another option, is that you may be able to free up space. And somebody actually was on one of the groups, I guess it was a couple of weeks ago, talking about like their goal was to build their daycare, and they were going to switch over to enrichment daycare, which generally you can charge more for. But their whole goal was to build up their enrichment daycare to be profitable enough with a membership so they could stop doing lodging. And that was their goal. And because then they would solve a whole lot of problems they were having, one of which was just they were full for daycare, and the other was the stress of just always being there for the holidays and all that. They wanted to get rid of that, and that's another option.